So this is building accessible reports and dashboards. My name's Amanda Koski. I'm a PM on the Power BI desktop team. My main focus is on visuals and reporting features. I also own accessibility in the Power BI desktop and the reporting view of the web. You may also have seen me. I do in the blogs. I write up the desktop blog every month, and I'm in a lot of the videos related to the Power BI desktop as well. So you may have seen me there. For this talk, I'm going to spend a little bit of time starting out talking about what accessibility is and what it means to build accessible products. And as I use the word product throughout this presentation, I use it very loosely. A product could be just a Power BI report that you're building out yourself to share with people in your company. It could be an app that your company is making that happens to embed Power BI reports in it. Anything that you're building to share with others, I'm considering a product throughout this whole session. So the question, whenever you start asking what is something, I think a great place to start is the definition of it. And according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, accessibility is making sure that people with disabilities have access to the comparable information and data as someone who does not have a disability. So it's all about making sure we are on equal footing, data equality, we all have the same information and we can have a conversation together. I like to add on top of that the very simplistic definition that dictionary.com gives. That definition is easy to approach, reach, enter, speak with, or use. I think this is a nice addition because it speaks to the fact that whenever you're building an accessible product, it's not just about it's possible, it's also about making it easy to use. And whenever you make a product easy to use for one segment of the population, you really do make it easier to use for everyone. And so as you're starting to build out your accessible product, your Power BI report, your app that's using Power BI, you'll need to consider some design principles for building out accessible products. And these really help you understand what's needed as you're building out those products. The first design principle is flexibility. You need to make sure that your product is customizable enough and flexible enough to work for whatever needs the person has. You can think of a good example of flexibility in Power BI is the number of ways that you can choose to consume a Power BI report. You can consume it in the desktop or the web. You can embed it in an app. You can embed it in a site, your own website. You can publish it and show it in a SharePoint site. We are very flexible to meet the consumption needs of the users in Power BI. The second design principle is having a choice of input methods. So whenever someone is using your product, you need to make sure that whether they want to use a mouse fully or use a keyboard fully or use a mix of those two things together, they're able to navigate to everything that they need for the most common task. Very similarly, they also need a choice of output methods. So if a user wants to just look at the visuals themselves, that should work for them. They should also provide a way for them to see the text that describes the chart or change that into voice or even do something potentially with tactile monitors, being able to read Braille. Any kind of output method the user wants should be supported. Next, the fourth principle is consistency. So it's important every time a person comes back into a product, it works the same way it did before. Whenever you get to a chart, the chart is accessed the same way. You can interact with it the same way. It's consistent across all uses. This is important because if you don't have this, you get confused. A user can get confused, they can get lost, and they cannot understand how to get back to where they were. The fifth principle of accessibility is around making sure that your application is compatible. It needs to work with any kind of accessibility aid that the person may want to use. There's a lot of types of screen readers out there. There's other accessibility tools as well. I mentioned there's displays that convert text into Braille. There's a whole lot of different accessibility aids, and you need to make sure that your product will work across all of the different aids out there. As you're building out your accessible product, it's also important to consider all the different standards that are required when building out an accessible product. So for most people in this room, as you're building out your product, the thing that's going to matter most to you is the web content accessibility guidelines. These are a set of guidelines that define what it means to build out a product that is easy to use for everyone, including those who are using assistive technology. There are 4 principles in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The first principle is that your content needs to be perceivable. This has a couple of different layers. The first one is, of course, something, say an image in your app, needs to have some kind of alternate text behind it that can be converted into voice or braille or any other ways they want to consume. But it also means making sure there's a high enough contrast. You need to have a high contrast between any kind of text you have versus the background so that someone who is low-sighted can also be able to read that text as well. You also have to consider what colors you are using in your product. So there's a lot of people who are colorblind out there, and if you use only color to convey a meaning, that's going to be lost on a segment of your population. So you need to make sure what colors you're using are compatible with they need to be colorblind friendly. The second principle from these guidelines is that it needs to be operable. So that means that you need to be able to access anything in the content using whatever means that you have, mouse, keyboard, and it means that you can't get stuck in something. So you can imagine if you're building out an app and someone's navigating into a dialogue with the keyboard, you need to make sure that they can exit that dialogue as well. There needs to be no keyboard traps or mouse traps where they can't leave that spot again. The third principle is around being able to understand the content. This can mean anything from making sure that the text in your report is easily translatable into a language that the person's more comfortable with, or maybe a simpler form of text as well. It can also mean making sure that whenever someone's in the app, they can know where they are in relation to the rest of the product. So they know, like, okay, I'm on page 1 of my report. I know there's 2 more pages. Being able to know where you're at and how to get where you're going, that's really important for understanding the product. And then the final principle here is around robustness. Your product needs to be robust enough that it can handle any of the current and future accessibility aids that are coming out there. And the way to do this is just to make sure you stick to the standards for technology, like how a drop-down works, how a radio button works, as much as possible, so that as future aids come out, they will continue to work with your product. It's also important to consider different requirements that exist in your country or region. A lot of times a country's government defines some standards for what it means to have an accessible product. In the US, this is Section 508, and Section 508 basically lists out a whole bunch of standards that you have to meet if you want to consider your product accessible, and this is a requirement for if you want to sell your product into anyone in the federal government. This is very common in other countries as well. For example, in Europe, there is a European standard for accessibility as well. And so as you're trying to research your product and figure out what you need to do, it's important to kind of look at your regional requirements as well. So at this point, you're probably thinking, this sounds like a lot of work. I have to learn these design principles. I have to figure out the ways to integrate them into my product. I have to research all these different standards and figure out which ones apply to me, because they don't always apply to everything, and do all this work to integrate it. And so I think at this point it's really important to remember why this is so important. Accessibility really does affect such a large segment of the population. If you want to reach at all a wide segment of the population, you have to build accessibility into your product. It's just so important. And so at this point, I am going to actually take a slight break from talking, and I'm going to play this video. This video was made by the Windows team. It expresses, one, how important accessibility is to Microsoft, but it also outlines some of the reasons why accessibility is so important. So I'm going to play that video for you now. Hopefully. Oh. Oof. And play.
When you build features for people that have a range of abilities, you end up making something that works for everybody.
For me, one of the amazing things even today after 15 years at Microsoft is how we're inventing new experiences.
When we sat down and we were focusing on those with low vision and no vision, we decided really we need to work on performance. To start Narrator, I'm going to hold down the Windows key and press Enter.
Window, start window, search box. Team increased 65%, team increased 75%, team increased 80%.
So right now we're at about 80% of capacity of how Narrator could speak. And this is about how I would use my computer. That probably sounds like gibberish, but once you get used to this, it's pretty quick.
One of the things that we spend a lot of time looking at is how do you really help a developer be immersed in what it means to be blind? We built in the developer mode in Narrator.
Caps lock, shift, developer mode enabled.
So now you can see that we've blanked the screen. So I'm going to press H to jump to the first header.
Heading level 1, go to Bing homepage.
And it will kind of immerse you in what that is like to not see wrap.
Click down to change to suggestions view.
Across many applications when you're typing, whether it's weather, news, Cortana, you're getting search suggestions.
Font du lac, 1 of 1, selected.
It's the first time that we're building that level of accessibility into both our screen reader and our applications.
I'm gonna flag this message.
Content delete button, move button, set flag button.
Xbox looked closely at how they can diversify how people represent themselves. And so you'll see a new set of avatars so that someone can select an avatar that looks more closely to themselves.
So with Windows 10, the Edge team really wanted to do our part and make accessibility great on the web.
Enter, hub.
Whether they need a screen reader, whether it's high contrast, whether it's keyboard only.
At level 3, draggable.
It was really about making it more usable and more intuitive for all of our users.
So in the future, I think the key is really matching the ability of the technology to the ability of the person. So everybody can participate.
So hopefully in that video you can, one, of course, see that accessibility really is important to everyone in Microsoft. We're trying to build accessibility in across the entire product suite of Microsoft. But there's a couple of comments that they made in this video that I think is important to discuss a little bit further. The first one is the fact that whenever you build a product for those in need, it really does make the product better for everyone. So if you remember back to those principles that I mentioned just a few minutes ago, things like consistency and flexibility, those things are just good for everyone. You like your product. When you go into a product, it looks the same way and works the same way every single time. As we continue to make the product usable for people who need accessibility, it also just makes the product better for everyone, and that's one of the main reasons accessibility is so important. The other comment that I think is really key that they made was the fact that accessibility makes it easier for everyone to have access to the same data. This is really important because it allows us all to be able to have a conversation together with all of the same knowledge, and just makes everything so much easier and simpler when we have those conversations. Another key reason why accessibility is so important is because it affects such a wide section of the population. A lot of times when people think of accessibility and reporting together, a lot of times they think about making someone who is blind be able to understand the charts. That is part of it, but it's not the only part of it. There's so many different disabilities in the world that need accessibility to be considered in the product. For example, there's people who have low vision and they need to be able to make the text size big enough they can read it, or pop out a visual and make it larger. There's people who have little to no color perception. And so many reports rely on some KPI that's just a dot and changes color from red to yellow to green, and that tells them if something's wrong. And for a huge section of the population, they get nothing out of that. They cannot understand, they cannot see the color changes, and therefore the report is useless to them. You have to also consider things like limited dexterity, and there could be sections of the population that cannot use a mouse, and so they have to be able to use a keyboard to navigate around. As you can see, there's even more on this list. There's just such a huge section of the population, way more than you think, that is affected by this. And that's why it's so important you build accessibility in mind when you're making your reports. You want to make sure that your data and your reports are reachable to many people as possible. So jumping into what I'm sure you guys are all sitting here hoping I get to as soon as possible, what Power BI and accessibility together. In Power BI, we are starting down the path of making the product accessible, and we're putting a lot of effort into this. And I think to help you understand why this is so important to Power BI in general, we should take a step back and think about Microsoft's mission as a whole. Microsoft's mission is to empower every single person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And there's over 1 billion people in this world with disabilities. And so that's why we're passionate about ensuring our products and services are designed for people of all abilities. Whenever a product is made, taking into consideration the diversity of the people who are using it, it makes the product a whole lot better. And specifically with Power BI, we all know that data is incredibly powerful. It allows us to make data-driven decisions and change the way our businesses are run. And I know you guys all believe that as well, otherwise you wouldn't be at the Data Insight Summit if you didn't believe that data was powerful. And so that's why it's important that for us that we make Power BI accessible. We want to put data into everyone's hands, and so we can all start working together to make everything more successful and achieve more in their companies. And so with that in mind, like I said, we started down the path to making Power BI more accessible, but the entire product suite is enormous if you consider everything that entails. And so we picked a section of the product to start on first, and then we'll be slowly making more and more of the products accessible, releasing them as we go. And since we wanted to start by making data more accessible to the widest section of the population we could, we started with report consumption. There are a lot more report consumers than there are report authors, and so this enables us to hit the most amount of people with our first release. And so with our goal of making report consumption accessible for everyone, we had 2 goals in mind. The first was that we want to enable people who are consuming reports to be able to navigate and understand the sections of the report that matter most to them. So this includes both the reporting canvas and being able to switch pages, visuals, being able to navigate all of that. And the second is empowering report authors to build accessible reports for their users. And so for that first goal, allowing consumers to consume report and navigate reports, we, as of today, now support keyboard navigation and screen reader support in your reporting canvas. You can tab between visuals, you can switch your focus down to the report page tabs and move between the different pages, loading the ones you want and moving back and forth purely with just a keyboard. And you can also use screen readers to be able to consume the content. You'll be able to hear what page you're focused on. You'll be able to understand what visual you're on. You'll hear the title of the chart. You'll hear what type of chart it is. And then you'll also hear a description of the chart. For report authors, we, as of today, have now 3 features that are four features that are very important when you're building out accessible reports. The first is that you can now add alt text to any of the charts you're adding on your canvas. You can think of that similar to if you're building out a web page. A lot of times for images, you give a little textual description of what's in the image. Excel has this feature as well. When you're building out Excel charts, they also allow you to define a description of the chart for the screen reader to read. And so this is really important because this is the way that you communicate to the screen reader why this visual is on the report to begin with. Why is it important? What insights that you were hoping they could gain from looking at this chart? And so you can type all this out and have the screen reader be able to consume that. We also added a new feature this week called data markers. They let you add shapes to the different lines in your line chart or area chart or the line on a combo chart. Anywhere there's lines, you're able to now differentiate each of the individual series in your line chart based off of not only the color, but also the shape of the marker. This is really important for color blindness, since especially with lines, they tend to be very thin, and as they crisscross with each other, it can be very hard to differentiate the lines from each other if you can't perceive certain colors. And so with data markers, you're able to do the customization and that will give users another means of being able to tell the lines apart. We've released previously a feature called theming. You may have seen that a couple of releases ago. This preview in the desktop lets you upload the theme that you want to apply to your report. And with accessibility in mind, this is really good because then you can build out your own accessible theme or take one from our community and upload that into Power BI, and you'll be able to make sure that all the colors that are being used in your report are colorblind friendly. And then the last feature that is really important to accessibility is actually embedding. Embedding allows you to be able to create your own accessible app or your own accessible web page that meets those standards I talked about earlier. And then a user will be able to easily access the report just by using a keyboard. They can navigate your own web page and be able to put focus on the report and move between the charts. And if you don't want to build out your own web page or your own app that meets all the accessibility guidelines, you can use SharePoint as well. We have SharePoint embedding. SharePoint is a great product that is already fully accessible, and so you'll be able to use that as well for embedding your report in. So now I'm going to demo some of these features I just talked about and show you how to build an accessible report. Okay, so this report you're looking at, this is actually my watch data for all the shows I watch. I watch a lot of TV, and so you can see all the different shows I watch and how many times I've watched it. And so now that I've built out this report, and by the way, this is my actual live data. You can see how big of a nerd I am by looking at the shows. Don't make fun of me too much. But I built out this report. I want to share it with my team so they can see how big of a nerd I am and maybe they can get some show recommendations. So before I publish it, I want to make it more accessible. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by uploading an accessible theme. So right now it's just using the default Power BI colors. And instead of those, I'm going to pick a theme. We have this great theme gallery in our community that lets you, there we go, zoomed in. You can see all the different things that people have created in the community already. And there's this way that you can filter down, and you can actually filter down to just accessible themes. And themes that are included in this list are themes that either are high contrast or colorblind friendly or both. If you do choose to make your own theme, it would be very helpful for others in the community if you published it here as well, so we can continue to share. But you can take any of these themes, you can view them, and if you like them, you're able to download them and use them in your own report. I've already downloaded mine, so I'm going to just go up here to my import theme option, and I'm going to pick my colorblind theme, and it will automatically apply to my entire report. And now my report has a very colorblind friendly color palette. I'm now also going to take this line chart here that shows by month how frequently I watch certain rated shows. And in the formatting pane, I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn on markers, that new feature I mentioned. Under the formatting pane, it's in the shape card. And you'll see in here, we have this new option called Show Markers. And when you turn it on, it will automatically apply a dot to each of the individual points on a line. And the color automatically matches the color of the line. And while they do start out as all dots, I can now go in this option here it's called Customize Series, I'm able to go in and customize each of the options in my legend. So I'm going to turn that on. And you'll see in this section now I have a drop down that has all of my legend options. And I'm going to leave PG as a circle and go into PG-13. And from here, I can choose to set my marker shape to something else, say a square. And now it's automatically applying the square to the green PG-13 line while leaving the PG line a circle. And so this makes it a lot easier to tell the lines apart. I'm no longer just relying on color. The last thing I would want to do for this report is use that alt text feature I mentioned. It's really important to type in a description for all of your charts that tell people what the insight is. You can find this option under the General tab on all of your charts. This is new right at the very bottom of the card. This is new option called alt text, and you can type in whatever you want. For example, all the TV shows I watch based on time spent watching in minutes. I spend most of my time watching Gilmore Girls, which is true. That's the highest bar there. And so you need to make sure that you do this for every single one of your charts. I'm not going to make you sit through that. I've already pre-populated all the other charts with their descriptions, so don't worry, you don't have to sit through me typing. And so now that I've did the work to customize this report to make it accessible, I now can save it and publish it up to the service. And once there, what I can do is I can use the SharePoint embed code to embed it in a SharePoint site. And so I've already done that. You'll notice I don't have any SharePoint designing skills. Hopefully your SharePoint sites look nicer than my SharePoint site does. But you can see I have my watch data here embedded. And now whenever a person's using accessible tools, they're able to navigate the report. So I'm going to demonstrate that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on Narrator, which is the pre-installed screen reader that comes with Windows. Most people who use screen readers actually use NVDA or JAWS, two other screen reader options. But if you want to just test out these features, Narrator is a really good tool to use to test out all these features. So I'm going to turn on Narrator, and hopefully my sound comes through.
The frame displaying a Power BI report.
And so you see
items within this container may not.
So you can see that it adds this nice blue frame so I can see what's in focus currently. And as a person who is actually using Screen Reader, I could choose to navigate through the entire SharePoint site using just my keyboard and eventually move my focus into the reporting canvas. For the sake of time, since I'm not a normal user of screen readers, I'm kind of slow at using it. So I'm just going to move my focus directly into the report. And you can see once I click on this chart and it moves the focus, it will start reading all of that information.
Microsoft Power BI. Matrix table showing number of times watched and length of time watched in minutes for each genre. The top genre is comedy, which was watched 409 times and 3.41 minutes. Group.
And so now that my focus is on charts, I can choose to continue to tab through each of the visuals and hear the description. All I have to use is tab.
Min. By title clustered bar chart shows for each show the amount of.
So I can continue to do this and interact with my report and actually understand what insights were supposed to be found in this report as a user who's just using a screen reader. It seems kind of slow here because my speed is very slow, but if you remember back from the video, users who actually use screen readers regularly, they listen to it at such a fast speed. This is actually not that slow of a way to navigate through a report. I can also, as a user who's just wanting to use a keyboard, move my focus. Right now it's on an individual chart, but I can move my focus using Control F6, that's the keyboard shortcut, move it down to the page switcher down at the bottom. So by doing that.
Watch data raw watch data, selected. Watch data tab item. Selected.
So now my focus is down at the page. It tells me what the name of the name of the page is and if it's selected or not. And again, I can use tab to navigate through the report page tabs as well.
Non-selected. Raw Watch Data tab item. Non-selected.
And so now, let's say I'm interested now in this page. I can use Enter to load it. And then I can again, using Control F6, move my focus back to the reporting the objects on the report page.
Table A table showing the raw watch data. Includes the date, application, file,
So now with these features, a user is finally able to start being able to interact and consume a Power BI report and actually start to get the same insights that a user who is sighted can. So now that you've seen the features that
narrator settings. Tap 3 times with narrator settings. Amanda's TV watch data. Internet running
as you
applications.
can tell, I don't use narrator that often.
One running window button. Double tap to activate.
Okay.
Narrator settings. Exiting narrator.
So now that you've seen kind of like some of the features that we do have in Power BI, you might be wondering what else. Obviously, that is incredibly simplistic. There's a lot more that we need to do to make Power BI more accessible for users. And in the short term, we have a couple of items on our list we plan on doing in this area. So the first thing we want to do is we want to enable people to be able to also consume the data behind the chart. So right now, it's relying on a description that the author entered themselves. This isn't always the best approach. If you have data refreshing really fast, it can become out of date, and it's quite tedious on the author to keep updating the information every single time. And so what we're going to do is, if you know the feature See Data, this already exists in the product. If you right-click on a data point, you can actually see a table version of that chart. So for example, if you're looking at you have a bar chart that shows countries with sales. If you use See Data, you'd see a table with each row being a country and its corresponding sales. We're going to allow, through a keyboard shortcut, access to a similar view. And from there, a user who's using a keyboard will be able to navigate between each individual cell in that table using just their keyboard and the screen reader be able to read out that data. And so once we do this, that will enable someone with a screen reader to have access to the exact same data that someone who is sighted can see. And then you can just use the description to give a very general overview of what the chart's goal was, and then the user themselves, if they're interested, can drill down and get to the individual data. We also want to build out dashboard accessibility as well. Everything I showed here was focused just on reporting. We, of course, also want to make dashboards accessible in a similar manner. We want to make it so that users can tab between different tiles, hear what the tile's about, explore the data, and then choose to drill into the report if they want to. We also want to add even more formatting features within the reporting section to be able to make it easier for you to make accessible reports as well. We want to take that same markers feature that I showed you for line charts and extend that to scatter. Especially with scatters, when you have a lot of little dots overlapping with each other, it can be really hard just by color, even for someone who is not colorblind. It can be sometimes hard to tell the colors apart. So you'll be able to, once we add this feature, be able to use shapes as well for each of the different categories on your scatter. And that will be another way that you can make sure your report is consumable even by people who are colorblind. We also want to continue working on line charts, and we're going to add styles to our line charts as well soon. So you'll be able to use, and if you don't want to use markers, you can make one line dotted, one line dashed, one line solid, and that will also make it easier to tell those lines apart. And so these are the different features we're planning on adding, and these are all in the near term. Of course, we will continue iterating on the desktop and the service even more, building out more accessible features as we go. So that was all of my prepared content. Now is a good time if you have any kind of questions at all, please let me know. I think there's a mic set up there if you want to talk and ask questions. Anyone? Yay! Good, thank you.
So these are pretty exciting features, but when are you actually going to make usability a choice on consumption and not a developer effort? I mean, if I can load a theme, there are many people with different, I
right.
choose one level of color blindness, there's like 10 levels of color blindness. When is it not going to be just a consumption decision and not
right.
me having
Right.
to decide who am I going to support?
Right. Yes, that's something we definitely want to enable. We want to be able to allow on the consumer side you to be able to switch your view. So if you need to go into high contrast mode and the author didn't consider this, we want to enable you to be able to do that as well. That's a little bit further out, unfortunately, right now, but it is something on our backlog that we do plan on getting to. Well, one other feature that I didn't mention here that we are adding is we're going to enable, similar to Office, an accessibility checker as well. And this will make it easier for you to tell who is your report accessible for. And so you'll be able to drill down and say, like, okay, this is accessible for color blindness, but it's not high contrast. You'll be able to, using this feature, be able to tell what remains for you as a report author. And so that should help you as well.
So the alt text is something that makes, I mean, it's very easy to see how it works for when something is static. But one of the things that Power BI tries to sell is the dynamic nature of the information. So to what extent is there the ability to have something like alt text, but be dynamic based off the information that's selected from the visuals?
So we're doing some research to figure out a way to do this. I would say it's not going to be immediate, like it's not going to be in the next couple of months like those features I did list are. But it is something we are looking into, maybe using features similar to like we'd have for Quick Insights, or some other feature that lets you make a dynamic alt text. Something you could use in the meantime is we do have a custom visual for narrative science, which generates text automatically for you based off the data you put in. And so that is until we figure out a way to integrate into the product, that is a good visual for you to use as well. Narrative science. Yeah, they have a custom visual you can look into. I don't remember exactly what the location is, but if you just Google narrative science Power BI, it should come up. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Sold. Thank you.